let's see, last class we had an interesting discussion regarding the strengths of various media. Hopefully that'll come back and inform our work in a broad sense as we write for radio, television, the web. We'll get a chance to think about how the same story gets reworked to take advantage of the strengths of each medium as you work on it going forward. We are looking ahead to having some story ideas. So how's that going, by the way? Any questions or any thoughts about those two story ideas that I'm hoping that you'll bring in? I'm just checking the date for that. So two story ideas, September 18th. So it's a fair ways off, but any questions or thinking about that? Yeah.
What's the assignment?
The assignment is, so this assignment actually sets up several other very important assignments. It's about the most important thing you have to choose by September 18th. I'd like you to choose two fact-based stories that you can report on. So things that are actually happening in the real world, and this would be original reporting. It's not like you find it in a newspaper, rather it's something close to you that you can tell us about. And so I'm asking for two story ideas because sometimes one will fall through. The essential thing about the story idea is it should be somebody interesting doing something interesting. You must be able to interview someone about each of these stories. So they have to be accessible to you. Don't make the mistake of saying, I'm going to interview the president of some corporation and they won't talk to you. So one story should be about an event. The other story should be a profile. So an event, something that's just happened or is about to happen that you could report on. A profile, a person who's doing something interesting. They may be involved in the event or not. That's okay. And so you're writing a couple of paragraphs here. A paragraph about what kind of event you want to cover and a paragraph about what kind of profile you want to cover. And again, this has got a very practical outcome because as soon as you submit this, you're going to interview that person or find out something about that event and start writing a story about it. So that's why it's important. Yeah?
Now, with this interview, is it like video interview or is it like
You will take facts and sound bites from the interview. You will not present the interview to me in any other way. So it doesn't need to be audio recorded or video recorded. Some kind of recording makes it easy for you to find the sound bites.
Oh.
But the interview itself, whether it lasts 10 minutes or 20 minutes, you're just gathering information and some quotes, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But it'll be easier if you do record it to get those quotes. But that's not part of it. We're just writing scripts. So anybody got an idea that they'd like to share with us now? Just something they were thinking of working on to inspire everybody?
My friend was thinking, like my friend studies sometimes, she likes to decorate stuff. Like she recently she decorated my skateboard.
Interesting. Is she thinking of making a business out of it or something?
Oh, like she told me like if anyone gives comments or is interested, just DM her on Instagram.
Okay, and where does she get her inspiration from for these decorations and stuff?
YouTube.
YouTube? Oh, that's interesting. Are there a bunch of people doing that type of thing?
Yeah.
Sweet. So I think you have a story idea there. I think you got somebody interesting doing something interesting, and they're I think in a context of a bunch of people doing this where you could explore your friend as doing something as part of a trend, And so ask her, what are her motivations, what's her inspiration, and
what is it that her friend does? I didn't hear.
She does decorative art on skateboards. So yeah, that would be definitely one possibility for you to work on. Yeah, an event might be, we had a student a couple of years ago who did a farmer's market, for instance, at Stonestown. So one of the advantages of a recurring event like that is that, you know, the people who organize it are in place. You can find out who they are, you can talk to them, and you know, there's always going to be another iteration of it coming up. So it's not exactly like breaking news. I mean, very often this is a dilemma that people who want to get in, you know, their work publicized often face this. Like, let's say you're a band in San Francisco and you play, you know, recurring gigs. It's not really, you know, front page news that you guys are going to play again at the bottom of the hill or something like that. So, however, if you build it out into more of a profile, it's like, okay, what's going on with this activity? Can we situate it within, you know, a growing trend? Then I think you can make it newsworthy. And so, for instance, in this case, the person doing the farmer's market, you know, focused in on producers of organic foods, and then that led them to eventually go to Whole Foods and sort of contrast the neighborhood level farmer's market versus, you know, the industrial Whole Foods approach. And it was interesting. It definitely turned out to be interesting, even though the event that triggered the whole thing is, you know, a pretty small neighborhood local event. Yeah.
So it says an event that happened recently.
Yeah.
If we were to, like, this past weekend I went to a festival, is that like recent enough, or will it be
Sure.
recent enough in 3 weeks?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, it is again a constraint of you know, news that we don't have to worry about. Is yeah, it already happened, right? But for us in the class, we're practicing writing about stuff. So, as you know, you write, unless you choose to sort of write the aftermath, which you could, but otherwise you're free to write it as though it's up and coming, you know. And so it hasn't yet happened. That's okay.
Okay.
Right. You know, again, we don't claim to be news reporters in the class. We're learning about, you know, the craft basically, without necessarily putting it out there. Although I think there may be an opportunity to record some of your radio pieces and actually get them on our KCSF streaming radio station. So if that is an interest to you, I suggest, you know, participation in the BMO Club. I mentioned them on the first day, and let me put some information up here again up front. But the first meeting on September 4th of the BMO Club would be a great opportunity to get involved and to get your name on a list for a radio show, and maybe even, you know, sort of get that ball rolling. And I know one of the people who was very active, excuse me, in the radio station wants to do a type of news thing. He's actually finishing an internship at KALW, which is one of the public radio stations here in the city. And I think he'd like to try to organize something on KCSF of that nature. Since you guys are going to be writing radio stories, you know, and they have the recording facility, not just, you know, the live DJ booth, but also production booths where you could sit and record this stuff. If it ever transpired you wanted to put this into audio form, you could. But for the class and for credit, it's all just writing scripts. But keep that in mind. On September 4th, we're actually going to go over there. So that would be next Tuesday, and you'll see what goes on there. So, hey there. For those just coming in, if you can eventually just get on the attendance list, that'd be cool. Okay, so as you see, this assignment is still more than 2 weeks away, so give some thoughts as to what you would like to report on. Again, an A story and a B story, you will only necessarily be reporting on one of those stories, you know, but in case your A story falls through, you'll have a B story in mind, which is going to be helpful. I hope. Cool. Okay. While we're on assignments, there's an extra credit assignment that you could do. So it's all extra credit due next week. And it's related to the chapter topic for this week on fact-checking. And the chapter is more generally on the importance of accuracy, which I think is a good thing to talk about. So, I mean, let's just open this up for now. So this one's extra credit. Remember, you don't have to do it. You don't lose anything, but if you want to do it, it's great. In this one, I basically ask you to find a news article from a newspaper like the San Francisco Chronicle. Look through it. Make sure it's of a length of like 300 words or so, not just a tiny little blurb, but a more considerable article. And you want to be looking for a news article, not one that is an editorial or a feature story type of thing, because that would have way too many facts, and they'd all sort of be dedicated to, it would be very broad. It'd be tough to do this assignment with something like that. So the assignment is, on a Word document, create the heading Facts That Can Be Checked, and under the heading, number all the details from the story that you could look. So read the story and see what facts are in there that pop out at you that make a factual claim that you would want to check, basically. So list those out under a column which says facts that can be checked. And then next to it in another column, go write process of fact checking and dig through and make some proposals as to how you would fact check that. So, and you want to be specific in there. So, you might be reading through an article and, the mayor's office may say that, there were 3 times as many traffic accidents this year as there was last year. So check out, you want to note down, okay, there's a fact, and you want to know who's the source or what the source material actually was. So it's really just careful, close reading. And then in the process of fact checking, it's like, well, who was that person? How would you find out how to contact them in order to check the fact? I'm not saying you have to check the fact. You're just kind of getting a to-do list, basically, getting it set up and pushing it as far as, as you can without actually following through and doing the fact check. Also discuss what the fact checker would need to verify with the source. So it's like, all right, the source says the number of traffic accidents. You would want to verify, are those vehicles, or are they vehicles and pedestrians? You want to say who you would talk to, and can you find what their email address or whatever on the city website. If a fact or figure needs to be verified, discuss where a fact checker would go to get the correct information if you can. So it's really just about reading the story carefully, figuring out, okay, what is a factual claim? What are the factual claims made in the story? And then thinking about how you or any reporter would go through and check those facts. Okay? So there's an example here underneath. So when you get down to doing this, if you decide to do it, you can look through, read through the article, and then here it was too difficult to arrange this as 2 columns, but basically this is it. The fact that can be checked. Number 1, city of Philadelphia has a murder or 2 a day. So the process of fact checking, who would you contact in order to check that fact? Call the police department or the DA, get the statistics for murder rates, and you might find the website, you might find a phone number. So that would be it.
How many points is it worth? 5?
Yes, exactly. So you make the call as to whether it's worth it or not. But it's an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of loose in the sense that I'm not going to follow through every fact in your story. I'm not going to read every story either and sort of look through it. This is sort of more for you. Do this, right? Because obviously I couldn't do that.
Can I jump ahead a little bit?
Sure.
What's homework for next week? Are you going to give us homework for the next couple of days? Because we're going to come back on Thursday. So
Yes. On on Thursday. Well, we're coming back on Thursday and then next Tuesday. So there's no official assignment up until the 4th, which is this fact checker, and then the 11th.
Okay.
So the homework is do the reading, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So it's not like I'm asking you to do something else. You would have the time for the fact checking assignment.
Yes, you would.
And what chapters?
Well, if you look through to the modules, it's basically a chapter a week. And last week we really didn't pay enough attention to chapter 1, so we'll dip back into it. So we're here on week 2, and so we're looking at chapter 2, and next week we'll look at chapter 3, and eventually we'll go off that schedule. But for now, that's what we're doing. So just look through the modules if you can. And good. All righty. We good?
All right.
All right, good. Okay. Now that I mentioned it, we gave not enough attention to the chapters last week. So let's just take a quick look at what was actually in there.
And we were talking about stuff.
We were talking about the strengths of media, which is more fun than reading PowerPoints, I'd say. I always enjoy talking about that. This first chapter is about audience. And again, I'm not going to step through every slide. We'll just die of boredom. But the chapter emphasizes the importance that, particularly in this type of writing, we're writing to serve an audience, to serve their information needs. And so we shouldn't lose track of that. In the media, there are so many different channels now. I'm talking about, a local newspaper is a channel, a local blog is a channel, a national news, television show is a different channel. They all have different audiences. So we're writing to serve the needs of an audience. The audience is defined by, their consumption of whatever media channel we're in. So if we're in a hyperlocal blog, then we have a relatively small audience, and we can assume they're really interested in our locality, what's going on, at a micro level in our community, or in the area that we serve. If we're writing, for a local television show, then we know that our audience, news, we know that our audience is in the hundreds of thousands, and they're more interested in what's going on in our, local geographical area, Bay Area and such. But again, especially living in a place like the Bay Area where people are from such a diversity of sources, so many people move here, myself included, that Bay Area stories are often, connected out to other places, across the world even, because there are such large communities of people here from other places, so it's an interesting place to live. So all of these media channels serve particular audiences. We have other classes in broadcasting, which, and in fact, there's one in the morning where we probably talk about this type of issue. So we don't go into, all of the research methods that go into how broadcasters or other media outfits understand their audiences, but it's pretty involved because obviously the profit of these organizations depends on it. If I look through the modules, I did put up in last week's stack this page, how local companies know their audience. So for instance, you could take a look here if you were interested in this, in the media kit from the SF Chronicle. It's like basically they'll, tell a lot about their audience to the people who might want to advertise with them. So they need to break down, demographics, who's reading the audience, how old are they, what's their gender, and various kinds of economic factors about them.
If they're married,
That's right.
Yeah, I looked at it.
And did you? Okay, awesome. I'm glad you did. For broadcasters, it'll go down to, for instance, particular types of radio station will They'll have marketing information like who's planning to buy what kind of car, what kind of fast food they purchased in the last 6 months, and it can get very very lifestyle-y as well for some of these. So it's you know, there's a lot that one could learn about that type of activity, I guess. How, you know, who's in your audience? We tend to sort of make educated guesses about it. And my attitude is, if you come up with an interesting story about an interesting person, there's a channel that would be interested in that. If it's, you know, Chow's friend who decorates skateboards, that channel might be a kind of social media enabled, you know, YouTube, web, sort of an online, you know, because those are the areas that very specific groups of, you know, crafts people or just interested parties can get together. A lot of people have very local stories, like the farmer's market or something. Wouldn't make the Chronicle, but it would definitely make, you know, a local news blog or something like that. So these sections here talk over some of the ways that audiences are defined, and that's largely through demographic, geographic information. Psychographic information, this gets a little bit more like into the dark arts of the marketers, where they, you know, I don't know if you guys have read any of this type of thing, but they typically, one of the ways that they work is to make up some sorts of composite characterizations of their, you know, consumers. So we've got the empty nesters, we've got the 20-somethings, we've got the, you know, I don't even know their categorizations, but they would have, you know, composite characters to which they would then present to potential advertisers and say, okay, you know, we want to craft something for the empty nesters. And so content choices would be made according to that. These media organizations will, you know, make that clear to you when you work for them, who they think their audience is.
In the book, weren't they talking about something about how they'll talk about a specific college or something, and people will be fascinated because they went to the college? And
That's another, yeah, that's a possibility too. I mean, you can see that work on LinkedIn as well. There's, you know, the different discussion groups that form, and some of them are out of colleges and stuff. Yeah. So this sort of follows on with that practice of sort of making up people that you could that personify your audience. Key questions: what do they want from me? How do they want it? Does the audience change over time? These are questions that you could ask whenever you're thinking about, okay, what should I write about? Again, we're kind of working with a blank slate here in this class. It's like, you know, we're drawing on the people that you know, what you find interesting, and we're just saying, okay, you know, you'll whatever you can come up with would find an audience one way or the other. But of course, when you are employed by a blog, you know, that works on energy issues or something like that, then you would want to know, well, you know, who subscribes to this thing? Or are they, you know, administrators for public utilities, or are they activists who are, you know, want to know more about, you know, the latest disasters caused by public utilities, and so on and so forth. So you want to keep that in mind as you think about what you write, you know. And the main point again is think about you're writing for an audience. What does that audience want? So then this section changes gears a little bit and talks, it gives us a kind of shorthand acronym for interest elements for what an audience looks for in a story. If you find something interesting, odds are it touches on one of these interest elements more broadly. It doesn't have to touch on all of them. If you don't hit all 5 points of this acronym, you're okay. You still have an interesting story, I think. But this is one of the ways that editors and such talk about news values. Foci, F-O-C-I-I. So for each of those letters, there's a word which relates to what might interest people about a story. So one, fame. If you're profiling somebody that people have heard of, that has a draw. That will get people to pay attention to. They categorize fame. An extended period of fame or a limited amount of time? Who can think of a limited amount of time fame person that they recently were drawn to or would like to read something about?
Marissa Medical.
That's an excellent one. Published the Tell-All Insiders. Absolutely. I mean, she, I guess she had a smaller audience before, but she's huge.
Unfortunately.
Well, there's the news cycle is very short now. It's hard to stand out for an extended period. How about someone who's been, famous for an extended period of time? Who would you think of there?
Stephen King.
Stephen King, the author? Yeah, that's true. I'd be interested. Ron, did you have your hand up?
No, I'll just sit back here.
Oh, okay. Extended period, John McCain might be someone who's, of course, now he's being discussed because he's passed away, but, there's a million profiles about him, of course, due to that, but he was in the spotlight years and years ago. Extended period, okay. Oddity. So we're following FOCII, so oddity, something a little out of the ordinary, something surprising. Rarities, we highlight elements that make them different from everyday occurrences. So sometimes, you may hear of something like, wow, that's weird. How did that happen? Something that really reverses expectations. And so that can catch people's interest. So oddity, definitely one of those. Conflict, okay. And this one, I think, has a lot of credibility in investigative journalism. Some people are drawn like a magnet, basically, to controversial social issues. If it's the nurses' union fighting with Kaiser, or so on and so forth. So much, people blocking the bridge because they're upset about something. Conflict is immediately interesting to an audience. We talked about this last class regarding the number of sources that you bring into a story. Do you guys remember that? I thought that was an interesting little discussion there. The idea that, some profiles, for instance, of a famous person who's been famous for a long time, there may not be any kind of controversy around there. So it's not all that important to have a range of sources and information about the person, although of course it makes it interesting. But in a situation of conflict, it's really up to you to try to get on the record sources, different people positioned differently in the conflict. So a single source story about a conflict, you're really only getting one side of it. Sometimes conflicts are complex and they have, many sides. So
CNN makes all their money on conflict.
yes, it is. Often it's translated into conflicts of talking heads.
Yeah, just people yelling at each other.
People yelling at each other, which is, it's a weakness of the current news industry. It's easier and cheaper to get a bunch of people who disagree in a studio and have them talk to each other than to actually go out. But we're not going to be writing for talk shows, which is great. So but we're looking more something that's conflictual in your, in your news environment yourself, that you would want to have a couple of sources on. Okay. Immediacy. People want to know what's happening around them. So, something that's far, far away, even if it's a terrible thing, is not necessarily as interesting to your audience as something that affects them quite directly because it's very close by. So immediacy is another news value. Okay, that's one of the I's, and the other I is impact. So this is sort of as you make a judgment call as to, okay, how impactful is this? It may be impactful from a quantitative point of view. It affects a lot of people. There's an interesting podcast I was listening to this morning about Bernie Madoff. Remember the Ponzi scheme scammer who he's actually interviewed. This is fascinating, but So, the huge amounts of dollars that he cost people, the number of people who lost all their savings. So huge amounts of dollars might be a quantitative, call. Man, this guy, made $21 billion of people's savings disappear. And then qualitative, would be focusing in on how miserable some of those people were. Or, on the other hand, if you're profiling Bernie Madoff, just the fascination with, like, how could somebody be this crooked? Like, what were they thinking, like, when they did such a massive scam?
The crazy thing is it destroyed his life too. I mean, his wife walked away from him.
His kids, one of them committed
One of them
suicide
committed suicide,
2 years
and the other
later.
one died of
Cancer. Right.
So
Yeah.
it was like.
Did you hear the same podcast? It was Reveal?
No,
Okay.
no.
You're just well informed. Well, I could
Like what?
definitely recommend you the podcast called Reveal. The host is Al Letson, and they do a great job this week on that if you want to listen to it. Yeah. Ron?
So did that happen because of him, or is that just karma? I don't know.
Well, that gets into really, more philosophical stuff that I don't know if we could report on that.
That's like a tip, but I was just curious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that was very interesting in the discussion was you kind of figure that some of the people who were involved knew more than they let on, and that they were kind of milking Madoff. So it was sort of like at a certain point, he was like, oh, he's got these exceptional returns, and they would take money out, like billions of dollars out. And Madoff just had to give him the money, because if he said, no, I can't give you the money, he'd have to, point out that the whole thing was a scam. So he was actually drained, and although, he's made out to be the mastermind, the bad guy, the one who bilked everybody, when you listen to this, you realize some of the people involved must have known, and they were bleeding Madoff. And once he got into it, there was no way he could get out, because he would have to immediately confess to the whole scam. So people were like taking money out. So he wasn't as powerful as he seemed to be.
Well, it's ridiculous, because not only is he not powerful, he's like a chicken with his head cut off, because he literally. He did that so long, and he dug his hole so deep that he couldn't get out of it. It was
Yeah.
kind of, he's not a genius. There's nothing intelligent about anything that he did. So it's kind of like, and then at the end it's revealed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's just.
Yep. So let's look through this now. Take Bernie as an example, just so that we haven't digressed here. We can pull this back. Is there fame involved in that story? Infamy, absolutely. Everyone was talking about him. He built. Is there oddity?
Yeah, you don't hear about that every day.
You don't hear about somebody doing a massive scam like that every day, right? So as soon as I hear, oh, Bernie Madoff interviewed from prison, explains why he did it, ooh, of course, oddity, right? Conflict? Is there conflict?
Definitely.
There was at the time, Yeah.
It still is. Some of those people still haven't recovered.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Immediacy. I'm not a rich investor from New York, so I don't know if, can you guys see another angle on immediacy? People want to know what is happening around them. Not so strong. That doesn't make it a bad story, it's just not so strong there. And then impact, well, it certainly had, huge amounts of money, which draw people's attention and ruin lives. I think that draws attention there too, so impact. So again, whenever we talk about these stories of national scope, of course, I don't want people to feel like, yeah, but I don't know anybody like Bernie Madoff. You don't have to, right? It's okay to report on smaller events and, of interest to fewer people. But think through the FOCII can often help you explain to people why this is an important story. Why you think that somebody might be interested. So even in my assignment where I ask you, just give me 2 paragraphs, one about an event, one about a profile, but think through it. Sort of like, what would be, use these terms even, even for farmers market. Well, I don't see much conflict there, but maybe there is conflict. Maybe there's conflict between organic and non-organic producers, or between big companies that, can bring the price of organic food down and down and down because the producer has to sell to them, versus a smaller community-based farmers market, which can works in a different way. So maybe there is conflict there. So think that through, so on and so forth. And so this can help you. Impactful. Well, how could you could think about organic food. You could talk about certainly quantitative, like as a growing business. What share of the market does it have? How much money is spent locally or nationally on that type of food? Qualitative impacts, again, pulling the string of, is this healthy for you or not? So there's, it can help you flesh out the logic of your story and think about, okay, I know I've got these people, I know I've got this event. How should I develop this to make it even more interesting? So I think that's a good thing for that foci could be used for, that this news value concepts can be used for. So there are others, of course. There are different textbooks with different ways of conceptualizing this. And here are some more slides, basically just talking about other ways of thinking about how your story can reach an audience. Right up, and then the big three, each chapter kind of summarizes the main points. And I think these are pretty good ones. So focusing on the readers. So again, as you choosing, because I think one thing you may find is as you're doing your reporting, you come away with a lot of information. And then I'm saying, okay, we're doing a 90-second thing or something like that. And you got to decide, boy, I have so much, this could go on forever. So as you make your choices, think about what do your readers or your listeners really want to know about. So focus on that. Content is king. I think the idea there is what really attracts your audience is content as they see it. Rely on core interest elements. Well, does the FOCII model help you understand, what attracts an audience to your content and how you can, give them more of what they want, basically, on that idea. And these are broad assumptions. There's a lot of research that's actually done on, are they satisfied with what they're getting? But for us, I think this is plenty to get going with. So has this been helpful in any way? Foci. And could you say why it might be helpful or what you might do with this? Some people, yeah?
I'll say it gives your writing a little more to talk about than just one area.
Yeah.
To look at as to where the audience want to know more questions about the other letters in foci.
Yeah. I think it helps you explore for what's going to be of interest to an audience.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. And next week there'll be the who, what, where, why, when, how thing. Again, those are, the kind of factual things that you want to make sure you have straight for any story. But these are more overarching. It's like, okay, what is it that's really interesting about this? I found it interesting, obviously, or I wouldn't have done it. But how does that compare to the received knowledge about what's of interest to audiences? So hopefully that's useful. Any other ideas about how you might use this? But I think that exploring for places you can take the story is a good one.
Well, you were talking about immediacy. Like, for instance, the Bernie Madoff thing, it doesn't have any immediacy, but you said keep it in a certain area, or in our local area, so that's going to make everything that we're working on a little bit more immediate.
I think you're right, yeah. So there's a trick. If you ever want to justify what you want to work on, immediacy is a good point. Yeah, because it is close to us. Yeah.
So then I'll be like, yeah, that'll work. Actually, I had a class. I had somebody come to a class, it was a couple of students, and they're talking about all the classes that got canceled suddenly.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a meeting on Thursday at like 5 in room 140, and they're going to be talking all about that, and people are going to be recording and whatnot. But it's just a council meeting, but now they want everyone to show up, so it might be a little bit wild.
Yes.
Because a lot of people lost out by losing all those classes.
Of course. Yeah, and obviously faculty who lost work are very interested in
Healthcare.
Faculty's, their interest has been, it's impactful for many people. And there's also the dynamic where one wants to put the students first, so the students will be out front and center. Look at how you've impacted the students, but then behind it are lots of other interests that you could write about too. Yeah, and there'll be a series of events. There'll be, the union will have. I don't know if the union will be open to the public, but the Board of Governors is definitely going to be open to the public, and so I'm not sure when that is. That may be the event that you're actually talking about, and so that's open to the public. It's something that one could report on. It's something that you could find people who are involved to give you sound bites about it. So, and that would be a typical kind of assignment as well. Go to this meeting and report on what's said. That's a very typical type of media reporting assignment, something one would do early on. And that issue will not go away. They'll still be talking about it because it comes out of a structural problem of not enough students, and yet, changing priorities of the institution and so on. Happy to give you some background, but definitely not for everybody. Okay, so we did this. We did talk about multimedia, the different media and such. So cool. Let's pop out of that one. And we're kind of doing a 2-for-1 today, so it could be a little bit tedious. In fact, we have a half hour. Shall we kick this? Let's kick chapter 2 off to next class. Give you a chance to read it if you haven't yet read it. So let's look at something that we could do in class. I wanted to print this out, but there's no power in my building. But I think we could still work on this. Here's an interesting exercise from another textbook, but I think it's a real interesting one. What your speech looks like. This is interesting because we get used to writing for, essays in class or for expressing ourselves personally sometimes if we're lucky enough to be creative writers and such. Writing for broadcast is an interesting type of hybrid between conversational speech and the presentation of facts accurately. So you're basically writing with the cadences of speech so that an announcer or a reporter can actually say it and be understood. But you're also not making any kind of exaggerations or rounding stuff off so that anything that you say might not be factually accurate. So this is a very interesting exercise that we should maybe take some time in class now and try this out if we can. The only thing is I really needed to print this out in order for this to make a lot of sense, but I wonder if we could adapt this somehow. So the exercise, basically, and can I just move this along? I can't.
No.
I'm stuck behind my dock. Well, let me reset back out to regular size, but Jody wants me to go full screen. There we go. Okay, that's a little help. Anyway, I hear her cheering back there. So the idea is to read over this little story, which contains a few facts, and read it over a couple of times, and then with a partner, tell it to the partner without taking notes or without trying to read off of anything, Just tell the story to the partner. And if you have a phone, you can take a voice memo or something. If one of you or both of you does, that would be great. And record it. And then either here or back at home might be more realistic, but I mean, you could email the memo to yourself or something like that if it's not your own phone. The main thing is to transcribe this 30 or 45 seconds and just see what your speech actually looks like on the page. And when I did this, I found it really fascinating because you realize that all the way that we write, usually, is more like linear and more written for somebody who reads off the page. We've just been doing it for a long time, you know. To write the way you speak is a different thing, and it's very interesting to actually transcribe a little bit of speech like this. And why this will be helpful is just about everything that you write, even, you know, for radio, for television, it's all meant to be spoken. It's not meant to be read by somebody, you know. And that means that you're going to be writing shorter sentences with simpler sentence structure, and you're going to be putting less sort of hard to process data and more kind of broader concepts in. So in this case, the story, two great pandas are expected amidst a flurry of civic activity. The mayor, so this is very much written like a print story, right? Two great pandas are expected amidst a flurry of civic activity. The mayor, the delegation from the nearby Chinese consulate, zookeepers, reporters, and television crews have gathered. A large delivery truck pulls up, and after several speeches, the pandas in their special wooden packing cages are lifted from a long flatbed trailer. The rare animals are on loan from the zoo in Beijing for 2 months, during which time they will be housed in a special climate-controlled building. The pandas' diet consists of blue bamboo shoots. It'll be 2 weeks before the public views them. So a lot of facts in there and a lot of very detailed description. But what you want to do is, you know, without writing a script or notes, but read that over a couple of times. And then if we could pair off, just try to tell the story to another person. It's important that you try to tell it to another person because then the kind of conversational mode of thinking is going to kick in. And you'll see, I hope, that you can produce a coherent narrative, but in a spoken form out of something like this, which is very much a written form. If you read that on the air, no one will understand it. No one will come away understanding it. But if you absorb those facts and then just try to tell it to each other, and don't be afraid with starting with, you know, the most important thing and telling it like a story. Let's try that, okay? Did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. So could you guys, can you pair up? And hopefully everyone has a device that can record. Is that okay? And if you don't, maybe we can pair up with people who do have some kind of device. All right, so
Let's see.
you two guys are pairing up. You guys, can you pair up? Can you two pair up?
So we're trying to recreate this in our own words, basically.
Right. Yeah.
We're not trying to add or take anything away, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Which is,
They're just saying like
if you do add anything, it's not. It's as long as it doesn't appear to be a fact, then you're okay. Which is why a lot of broadcast reporting sometimes can sound a little broad or wishy-washy, you know, because it's as long as you're not adding something in that sounds like a fact, then you're okay.
Okay.
But there's plenty in here to just try to make a selection of it. And for this exercise, really what we're trying to do is get a sense of when we speak, what does it look like on the page? But of course, it's a challenge already just to process this information.
Are we trying to cover all the details and
You're really trying to come in at between 30 and 45 seconds, which means you won't have time to get all the details. So you're counting on your own ability to simplify as you go along.
We'll have these great men.
Yeah.
And
Everyone else had a chance to at least record. So, you know, to make this really useful is you want to transcribe it afterwards, and you know, transcribe fully with all the uhs and the e. Okay, and so what I'm going to show you now is actually cheating, because I didn't put in all my uhs and oohs. So, you know, don't cave like I did here. Go in and put it all in and see the structure of your of your speech as written. So here I wrote, there are some panda bears that are on loan from the zoo in Beijing. In 2 weeks, the public will be able to see them. Today, they arrived at the zoo. They were in special boxes that were made to protect them. The pandas eat blue bamboo shoots. The public will be able to see them in 2 weeks. So I repeated myself. But one thing I noticed as I was doing it, my sentences are much shorter than they would normally be were I writing this for print. And I was able to retain a lot less information than there was in the original. And I think that's just a typical kind of cognitive sorting that goes on in your head, where I have faith that the most important facts will stay lodged in my mind. And I use that as a kind of a filter. You know, there's way too much in the original account of the story. I'm hoping that certain things will stand out. Now, you know, maybe they're not the most important ones. You could look through it and think about what you felt was most important. And when you transcribe, you know, think about those choices that you just automatically made. I know you had the text in front of you. Do you think it was easier or harder with all of those?
I think it would be easier for me to remember what I need to say.
On the other hand, there was a lot of detail in there that you maybe would have fallen away if you didn't have all of that, you know, if you didn't have the text exactly in front of you. So I think it's a good exercise just to see yourself kind of sort through stuff. But the other thing is just to see what your speech actually looks like, because I think you'll find yourself struggling or striving to make your writing as conversational as you can, and to only include enough detail and information that an audience can process as they hear it for the first time. And by sort of ad-libbing through it yourself, you're allowing your own, you know, brain to make that kind of sort for you. Now, maybe some people are way more, you know, detail-oriented than I am, and maybe they got way more detail in there. That's great. But check it out. And so you'll find, you know, you're very... a number of things. There's a lot of pauses, and you can indicate those by 3 dots. I was going just really fast. So you can indicate them by 3 dots. When we're speaking, sometimes we don't always conclude a sentence. A sentence can be a fragment in broadcasting, and that's okay. We'll be using pronouns sometimes more liberally than we would in printing, you know, in print writing for print. And, you know, I think I'm a little lame for having repeated stuff here, but repetition is okay as well in broadcasting. Maybe not in such a short piece. I would edit that for sure. But sometimes things need to be said twice. That in writing for print, you can expect people to go back and, you know, look at some information again that they missed, right? But in writing for broadcast, they can't go back, right? And they're definitely not going to run through a 5-minute video back to the beginning to find that section. So it has to be clear to them right from the start, you know. And so simplify things. Okay, so again, you're free to do what you want, because this is a not-for-credit kind of classroom activity, and most of the class is not here. They missed the fun. But, you know, if you want to follow through on this, I think it's really worthwhile to transcribe it and see how you actually talk. And, you know, of course, you'll remove the ums and ahs, but still the kind of the rhythms of your natural speech are what you are trying to reproduce when you are writing, you know, without introducing any extraneous stuff. You know, did this story happen in San Francisco or not? Who knows? And so, you know, watch out for what you inject into it, I guess. Okay, so follow up if you want to or not. And I guess we just have a couple of minutes more. So just to, you know, back to that reminder about the fact-checking assignment, and then we can look over chapter 2 next class. It's full of tips about fact-checking, and also I think something to pay attention to in the chapter is, you know, the degree to which fact-checking is actually also very mundane. Of course you want to check, you know, whether something that's asserted actually happened, but you also want to make sure that the names are spelt right, you know, that you don't have any grammatical errors or flagrant grammatical errors, that you don't, that your math adds up, things like that. So these are, you know, you wouldn't expect that. It doesn't take a gang of detectives to figure that out. But what it does do is it saps your credibility when you make those unforced errors. It makes you look unprofessional and somehow unknowledgeable, you know. And so you'll see a certain amount of that, which to me, when I read it, is like, oh, okay, cool. Fact-checking isn't always, you know, tracking down the very last detail of every story, although that's important. But it's also just, did you get the person's title right, you know? And so as you do that, you'll develop the reflexes that when you go to shoot your, you know, video for an assignment, you'll have people tell their name at the start of an interview. Hi, this is Malcolm Cecil. That's spelled Malcolmcecil. And my official title is instructor at City College of San Francisco. It's not San Francisco Community College, et cetera, you know? So you will, you know, develop the reflex to get these things on record right away that will help you be really fast and precise as you go about doing it. So that good reflexes to have, you know. And then also the other thing is we all want to be discerning consumers. So when we look at it, and when we look at a website that's full of, you know, errors of spelling or grammar or stuff, we say, was this written in Russia or something? What the hell is going on, right? So that's useful too. Okay, so we'll see you Thursday.
Mhm.